Have you ever been told you're not tough enough, or have you ever been told that you need more executive presence? My guest on today's episode of the Happier at Work podcast is Ellen Taaffe. Ellen has a wealth of experience in dealing with female leadership. We talk about 5 specific things that can act as a strength as you build your career, but then hold you back once you reach a certain level. So we go into detail on those specific areas, one or two of which are in relation to not having enough executive presence or being told that you're not tough enough. So I know you're really going to enjoy today's episode. You will take a lot from it with some practical strategies that you can start implementing straight away, as always. If you like what you see, don't forget to leave a rating, a review, and comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Ellen, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I know I heard you on another brilliant podcast with Ella, and I was just amazed. So I reached out and I thought, I have to connect with this woman. We talked about coming on the podcast, and now here we are.
Aoife, I'm so glad to be with you. And I love your podcast as well.
Thank you so much. Do you want to tell people a little bit about your career history? What brought you to doing what you're doing today?
Sure. So my name is Ellen Taaffe, and I had a 25-year corporate career working for Fortune 500 companies. And I started in sales, moved into brand management, and eventually left that, pivoted into a small business where I ran a boutique consulting firm, consulting back for big companies. At the same time, I joined my first board. I currently serve on 3 boards, and I became a coach after I left that consulting firm. And I love coaching people. I heard about a leadership initiative where I got my MBA, Kellogg School of Management of Northwestern University. And I joined Kellogg in 2016. And I teach a class called Personal Leadership Insights, which is all about figuring out who you are, who you want to be, and how you're going to get there. So it's really close to my heart. And I also run the Women's Leadership Program for MBA students at Kellogg. I'm a clinical associate professor there. And through that work, as well as trying to get more women on boards, and as the mom of 2 young adult daughters, I really grew my advocacy for helping women navigate the workplace and step into their leadership. And that led to writing a book that came out a year ago called The Mirror Door: Break Through the Hidden Barrier That Locks Successful Women in Place. So I'm currently doing a mix of things. So teaching, writing, speaking, and advising, as a board director.
Brilliant. I love that. There's so much that I want to unpack from what you've just said there, but I love this whole idea of personal leadership. Do you want to talk to me a little bit more about what that means to you?
Sure. So I think it's reflecting internally on who you are, what you're really good at. I'm a big fan of Strengths Finder. What are your strengths, and how can you leverage them? I think there's a double-edged sword to our strengths too. And how do you know what they are and know when, it's the check engine light? Like, how do you mitigate what those things are? We do a lot of work on identifying what your values are that guide you, that help give meaning and purpose many times in our lives and in our careers. And we get, I ask students to get feedback from 3 people, and very different feedback than the performance review, but who you are, how do I get in my own way, what opportunities are ahead, what dangers are ahead. And then the last part of being like a self-aware leader is understanding your needs. And that's kind of a new concept a lot of times, because no one wants to be needy, but we all do have needs. And when our needs are unmet, that's when we can feel frustrated or irritated or even angry. But understanding, like, what do you need to be at your best? In That's why I love your podcast too, of like, what do you need to be happier at work?
Yeah.
What do you need to thrive?
Yeah, yeah. And
So those
it's
are all the parts of who are you?
yeah. And it's so funny that you say that because so I did a master's let me think. I finished it around 4 years ago. So I probably it's just over 4 years since I would have handed in my dissertation. um but it seems like yesterday. But in that, I did all of this research around what does it mean to fit in, what does it mean to belong at work, and I devised from that my happier at work framework, which includes those three elements that you talked about: the strengths piece, the values piece, and needs. Like those are the three core elements. And
Mhm.
definitely needs is not something that we ever talk about. And if I think about myself, I never knew that I had needs that needed to be addressed. And it's not something that we necessarily talk about in the workplace. And going back to what you said, no one wants to be needy, but you certainly know when you feel frustrated at work. And that means that one of your needs is not being met. So it's so interesting how that completely overlaps there. I'm interested as well in this idea of the women's program that you run and how that differs from something that is more generic, let's say a generic leadership program.
I think a lot of the things that we cover in it are relevant regardless of gender.
Mm,
But where we go deeper in is where there are researched gaps between that women face. And so there are ways to try to figure out how do you overcome that. So for example, something like negotiations is part of the women's leadership seminar series that I
mm,
run and teach in, but I bring in a world-renowned negotiations expert who's on our faculty, and she also teaches a great class for everyone. But one of the things we know is that many times women don't ask, and now that we've started to teach women how to negotiate and they ask more, sometimes they face more backlash.
ah,
So
okay. Yeah, yeah.
the class becomes a different, we have different topics of like, why do we not ask? And then when we ask, how do we handle that? Sometimes there might be backlash
Mm,
based on, from men and women, based on some just kind of underlying things that are sort of rooted in our past and rooted in the way the business world has been. It's really research gaps that we can talk about pretty openly and help our students be able to form a network of people that can help support them as they go back into the world of work and are navigating things in real time.
yeah. And I think that's so important as well, just to have that group. So I know certainly I've taken part in programs and you stay connected with the people beyond just what the program delivered. So you're in a WhatsApp group or whatever it might be, but you stay connected. It's a way to hold each other accountable. It's a way to share wins that you've had at work, or it's a way to share frustrations or backlash, like you're saying, like what can I do in this situation, things like that. So I think it's so important, but it's interesting and not something I had really thought about. So it's not just about teaching women how to negotiate better or to ask for more, because there is a difference between how much women ask and how much men ask. But when they do ask, then it's more likely that rejection or backlash is going to come. So it's how to deal with those kinds of issues as well, which maybe highlights some of you haven't specifically said it, but biases, or, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, where a woman is in quite a senior position, but she fought really hard to get there. And she doesn't want to make it easy for other women to get there, because why should it be easy for them when she had to fight so hard to get there? Or she's protecting the hive and, she wants to be the only woman at that level, whatever it might be. All of these things kind of going on. What are the sorts of things that you're seeing?
Um, I do think that what you just shared does still go on sometimes. I
Yeah.
think it's getting relegated to the past.
Okay, good.
I'm
Yeah.
really intrigued with this idea that has come on a bit stronger through social media or TikTok over here. That is this idea of being a girl's girl, that in my generation, being called a girl was a negative.
Mm.
was like a put down. And today's younger generation is like being a girl's girl, someone who stands up for others. It's not being competitive and some of the things that, women have gotten pitted against each other in the past. And my view is like, go get them. Like I
Yeah.
love that. And how do we all be girls girls? So when there are these programs like the Women's Leadership Seminar, it is about creating competencies and connection, and it's creating that community too. That, the when we have more seats at the table, there's less likely to be that negative behavior of the past when someone was sort of guarding that one seat for the woman.
Mm.
So as we change the makeup of leadership and of organizations, it's not a zero-sum game,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's more room for all of us, and we can help support each other with that too. So
Yeah.
I see that. I also, I think one of the things that women face a lot of times is getting feedback of you need more executive presence, or I'm
Oh,
looking for
stop.
more
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
gravitas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's executive presence. And what does that really mean? That's one of the topics in the program. I talk about my book. I, in particular, talk about courage. And I think in a world where every women's conference or women's articles, there's so much on we're searching for confidence. And
Mm.
I truly believe that that's the outcome of taking action. And what
Totally.
we
Yeah.
really need is courage.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of that already. So we
Yeah.
just need to tap into that to move forward. And I think we're more ready than we think
Yeah.
so often to be
That's
able to move into action.
I think that's, I mean, there's so much I want to pick up on there. This idea of the girl's girl. And if I think back to, yeah, my childhood, it's you kick like a girl or you fight like a girl or whatever, these
Yeah.
connotations meaning that you're not very good or that, and they might say to a boy, like you do that like a girl, as if it's something that's really bad. I am seeing through advertising and things, the loads more women in sports or women being shown, or not women necessarily but girls as well, being shown in such that sort of positive light. So it's really encouraging to see that. And I saw from your LinkedIn newsletter that you did talk about the girls. So I would encourage anyone to follow along and follow your newsletter as well for insights like that, which I think are so they're so interesting, I think, because I wasn't aware of this new way of calling girls girls. But it's brilliant. And especially if it's one of those social media trends that we start to see as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's the gift of having two Gen Z daughters.
This is it. This is it. The courage piece, I think, is so interesting as well because I speak about the topic of imposter syndrome quite a lot. And in my framework, I talk about that the third step is courageous action. And again, to reiterate your point, it's not like you don't have to wait till you feel confident to do something. You just need to start doing something. And that's how you build confidence, is by taking action. It's not by waiting around until you feel so confident that you're ready to take action. And it's the same with motivation as well. You're not going to sit around and wait till you feel motivated. You need to commit to doing something, and then you commit to taking action and you take the action, and that's how you build motivation, and that's how you build confidence over time as well. So it's amazing how there are so many parallels here.
I
um
love it. I love it.
I wanted to come on now to your book. Can you talk to me a little bit more about not so much the process, but like why did you write it? Like what need did you see there that required?
I had this experience, I was new in the job at Kellogg, and at the very first orientation, a female CEO shared her career journey. And when she opened it up for questions, all the hands that shot up were men in the room. And it was about, the audience was maybe 35% women. And I was struck by that because I know how brilliant and interesting and accomplished these women, in their late 20s. They already did a lot, but they didn't raise their hands. And it made me think of myself at my own orientation, but also at times when, I'd join a new board and I'd be too quiet. I'd play the observer a little too long instead of speaking up. And I started to see this in some coaching clients, this kind of hesitating, waiting for a more perfect time in so many, and I saw it in the research too, like in more recent research as well. And I think many people have heard of the research of women not going for jobs unless they have like almost 10 of the 10
Yeah.
criteria. I had heard that, but I started to see, wow, it's really validated in current. And that led me to think this is not, I thought it would be different for the younger generation. And I was seeing that it wasn't. And
Okay.
it
Yeah.
led me to believe like, oh, this is a more gendered thing. And, so part of it was in developing my program, starting to write articles, starting to speak about this. I did a TEDx talk. And in the TEDx talk, oh, there's a little line in there called the mirrored door, where I said when we face opportunity, it's like we're blocked by a mirrored door reflecting inward in a distorted view. And we can't get anywhere close to the glass ceiling if we don't move into action, instead of reflecting inward and thinking we're not ready or we're not worthy and busying ourselves doing all the things that worked before instead of trying something new or trying something that we don't know with a 100% certainty. So it was all these things coming together that after doing the TEDx talk, I thought, I want to take this into a book. Through that talk, I met someone AJ Harper, who runs a book workshop, and just decided to go for it. So I think I'm in a late part of my career where it's all about how do I make a difference? I do that in teaching and as a board director, but I also felt like I got to get the word out because we are so much more ready than we realize.
Mm.
And we are, I do believe we face a lot of biases, a lot of institutional issues that lock us out, but we are also locking ourselves in place.
Yeah. Can we talk about those two different elements? So, on the one hand, there's the internal that you mentioned. So, maybe we're looking too much in towards ourselves, as you mentioned. So, we're facing self doubt. We don't think that we're good enough. We don't think that we're ready yet. And we're therefore not putting ourselves forward for opportunities that we're well ready for. So, talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges associated with that and what you've seen from the research that you've done and from putting the book together.
Yeah, so I think that we tend to have a go-to voice that that might be like, who am I to do this? I had that with who am I to write a book? And I think there's real power in shifting our mindset to growth. Like, why not me? I have a message to share. What I started to see as I dug into it was what I call these 5 strategies that I think have made us successful, but also can unintentionally sideline us, and we don't always see that. And they're preparing to perfection, eagerly pleasing, fitting the mold, pushing pedal to the metal, and patiently performing. And each one of them makes us successful. There's a power to each one. It tends to be a peril that is both internally, usually in the form of some sort of stress or anxiety, but there's also a peril somewhat reputationally or how we're considered by others. And in each one of them, there's things we can do to pivot out of them. Happy to go into them,
Yeah.
but they're things that it's kind of a what got us here won't get us there
Yeah.
approach too. So like preparing to perfection, is that person who delivers excellence. They have all the answers and they do it through a ton of preparation and they show up perfectly. And, it feels good that this person becomes the go-to. They likely rose first in their class. If they joined an organization where they're in a cohort, they did really well. This is the straight A student, who just knows how to deliver. But what happens is, as we are in organizations, it just gets more complex. Expectations rise, and we have to move faster. We have to decide with all the less time to prepare. We have to decide with imperfect information. We have to take risks, and those are all a part of leadership, what's expected. And if we hold back in the I don't have enough information, we can start to be seen as that worker bee, but not the person to lead the team. And so this is for me as a coach, this is like the person who comes in with like, I don't get what happened. I have had this stellar career, and all of a sudden it's like something's changed, or I've plateaued, or other people are ahead of me. And part of it is learning how to prioritize our efforts, to really discern the risk on big risk things. Maybe it does take all that preparation, but maybe we are more ready to make a recommendation than we realize. But our past preparation ends up being a crutch many times. And so we got to realize our readiness, but ask for help too. And that might look like delegation. That might look like talking to our boss about what are the A's, the A effort, what are the B's, what are the C's. So there's ways out of this, but it's the risk of letting go of the way we got here, the heavy preparation, and realizing that, to move forward into leadership, being perfect at it, it's just never going to happen.
Yeah. I
And
think,
expectations have changed.
and we've talked about perfectionism and we've talked about some of the challenges that women face at work on the podcast before, but I don't think anyone's ever explained it in the way that you have. And for me in particular, it really resonates what you've said, this idea of feeling like you have to over prepare, and that can only get you so far, because you're going to reach a stage where there's just too much to do that you can't invest that amount of time. So either you burn out by trying to do everything, you can't prioritize, you're not seen as a decision maker, you are spending too much time analyzing risk, and you're getting passed over, but you don't really understand why that's happening. So I think you've explained it in such a way that really resonates with me anyway. I'd love to explore one or two of the others if you want to go into a bit of detail as well on those.
Sure. So I'll go to eagerly pleasing, and this is a great relationship builder, someone who's really other oriented. And, so many women fall into this because of how we were raised, and perhaps natural instinct too. And it's a great thing. This is the glue that holds the team together, but it also can mean sometimes we are not in the equation. So we might neglect what matters to us. And underneath that all, sometimes it can feel like we're taken for granted, and which can lead to feeling angry, or we can feel like we said something and we ruminate over, oh, did that somehow damage the relationship? And where this, so that's a sort of an anxiety and stress that can come with this. But there's also within an organization, reputationally, we may be seen as too soft and not able to handle conflict. And here we have to understand the people who this might resonate with, our relationships can withstand conflict, but we don't always trust that. And we need to be able to be in the equation, balance between others and ourselves. Women so often can more easily do this when we're advocating for our team or our family. We advocate for others, but not always for ourselves. And so, if we stay in this mode, we are not sharing our opinions enough. We're not raising the issues that need to be raised. And so often we need to learn to set boundaries, and we can tap into the care we have of the people we work with, the greater good, the department, to be able to confront some of these issues. And sometimes this is just even creating scripts that that are kind of our go-to for this. I think just even, what I'm concerned about is, what I'm wondering about is a softer way into how's that going to work with the timeline, whatever those things
Yeah,
we might feel but not say.
yeah,
So getting ourselves comfortable in the smallest way, like as you said, courageous actions.
mm,
It takes courage when we feel beloved and everyone likes us, but it's really choosing respect because as leaders and as moving up in our organizations, leaders have to confront the issues that we face, and we can disagree without being disagreeable. But we have this image, this persona of ourselves that would damage relationships. And do we really want relationships where we can't raise any issues? Probably not. So it's sort of a shift of mindset, but then it's a shift into actions of in the smallest ways
yeah,
start to set boundaries, start to raise issues.
yeah. I think again it's something that we've talked about before on the podcast, but maybe not explored it in the same depth that you have there. And I think for me, it resonates really strongly as well. And of course, now I'm wondering, I'm like, surely it's not a 2020 divide. There's probably overlap between some of them or maybe all of them. Um, Certainly from any research I've done, the perfectionism piece comes up hugely, hugely. Any thoughts on some sort of a breakdown or the fact that maybe some women experience all five of those different challenges?
I think you can experience all five. It's not a pie to cut up
Yeah.
in this. I would tell you, I probably have been most in eagerly pleasing.
Mm,
I share a story in the book of I ended up getting feedback finally that I was considered not tough enough.
mm.
And I really worked on that. I feel like I'm a situational perfectionist. If you saw my closets, you'd say I was not a perfectionist. But there's times where I have I think one of the things with perfectionism is, my students say FOMO, but I believe there's FOMO, fear of messing up. And I do
Ah,
have that, or
yeah.
I too long have played, I go in quiet into new situations and I really challenge myself to, like, in this meeting, I'm going to speak up earlier. I'm going to make 3 comments or things like that because I want to have the perfect comment, and it's just not how it works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You just have to do it and risk it not being the perfect comment ever. I love this
Yeah.
that you've shared that you finally got that feedback, and I want to reiterate that point for anyone who's listening today, because as a recipient of feedback, feedback should be there to help and to support you in your career. And had you got that feedback earlier, you would have been able to take action on that earlier, on the assumption that you agreed with what the feedback was saying and it was delivered in an appropriate way and in a way that's supportive and is there to help you. And as a leader, it just again underlines how important it is to share that feedback and to have those conversations with people, because it might be a blind spot. It might be something that they're not necessarily aware of. So if it's something that you perceive in someone else that could be potentially holding them back in their career, absolutely tell them. And if you're listening to this kind of feedback, take it on board, maybe seek out feedback from other places. I know when I've delivered tough feedback in the past, it hasn't necessarily gone down too well. And I think it's hard for the giver and the receiver, but usually the intentions behind feedback are really positive. So you know go and share that feedback and share it in a really positive way. But I want to come back to this point as well of the not tough enough, and how many people have been told that maybe you built a career on having really great relationships, and again you get to a certain level and having those great relationships and people pleasing and keeping the peace all the time and the harmony in the group is the utmost importance. But actually how you're being perceived by other people is that you're not being tough enough, that you need to bring a bit of conflict into those relationships, or you need to handle them better, or not cover up for people's mistakes, or whatever it is that you're doing. So I think it's such a valuable piece of feedback to receive, to be able to like, finally, I've got this feedback. Finally, someone was brave enough to tell me that this is the impact that how I'm behaving is having on the team.
Yeah, I think that giving, getting, and gaining from feedback is a superpower.
Mm,
I loved your episode with, I think it was Nia Thomas. Really great episode on feedback. But I think especially if eagerly pleasing resonates, tapping into our care of the other person and their career to be honest with them and let them know what's getting in their way. The interesting thing about is she tough enough? Women do face a bias of like if they are more eagerly pleasing or on that softer side, which is my personality, I get the is she tough enough, like other women get too. On the other hand, someone who it does not sort of share their warmth up front, they get considered, does anyone want to work for her?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there is this warmth competency balancing act that women navigate based on the biases that are just in our societies of, we expect the warmth, the other orientation from women, but we expect that toughness, that agency, that the other things from being a leader. And
Mm,
women are navigating trying to be both.
yeah.
So it sometimes can feel like walking the tightrope.
Yeah, well, this is it. And I'm starting to see more and more people talk about emotional intelligence and using more of those types of skills in leadership. So I'm hoping that the narrative eventually is going to change as those leaders move into more senior roles and they're using those types of skills and having those types of conversations and showing warmth and competence at the same time, and not the kind of typical masculine traits that we associate with leadership typically.
Great point. I mean, I think the pandemic, and I would say the younger generations are looking for something different. And
Mm,
so I truly believe we're moving away from the way to run businesses is command and control,
yeah,
top down, do as I say, and there's times for that in a crisis,
yeah,
perhaps. But I think, I would add to that much more collaboration and connection and empathy. And as we want to motivate cross generations in our workplaces and just meet the needs of employees and of our communities and society, I think the leaders the best leaders of today and the leaders of the future have that other side of them. I signed my books Take Care and Take Charge, which is my way of
uh,
saying it's sort of the traditionally feminine and masculine.
yeah,
It's leaders who have both that are
yeah.
really the leaders that don't we all want to work for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. And I suppose, yeah, like that's a really good point to think about who is the kind of person that you would like to work for as an individual and how do you be more of that kind of a leader, whether you're taking example from someone you've been led by before or doing the opposite of someone that you've been led by before as well. Ellen, before we wrap things up, I'd love to touch on a couple of the external factors that you mentioned. I know we touched on some of them already, but are there any ones that really kind of stand out? Like we kind of talked about this idea of bias, not in a huge amount of detail, but is there anything else that you're seeing out there as an external factor that is creating more hardship for women to succeed at work?
I think it depends on, I'm in Chicago, I'm in the United States, and I think we really need to address care in a different way, care for children, elderly, and I think that it still falls on women, certainly falls on families. And so things like paid leave and more flexibility, more predictability for workers that don't have a set schedule. So how do you figure out childcare? So I think that that becomes a real issue for growing families, but also for key times in our careers are also at a time of childbearing age and then, generations that are sort of sandwiched between raising kids and having elderly parents that are living longer, but that can sometimes be a care burden, a financial burden. And I relate it to an external issue that impacts women because caregiving does still fall more on women. And many times, between that and then if there's compensation gaps, which there still are,
Mm,
may not be true of every company, but there still are. People make they look at the equation between what all we have to do in our lives as well as what they're getting from work. So creating happier workplaces, but that are also sort of fair game for people to succeed, to be compensated fairly,
mm,
and to support that we have real lives too, are not
yeah.
just workers.
Yeah. We're starting to see I suppose a shift of that in Ireland and the UK anyway, with gender pay gap reporting. Now, that's not to say,
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of confusion between equal pay and gender pay gap, and I'm very aware that equal pay is could still be an issue if the job title is slightly different and things like this, that they find ways, or it's not perceived as prestigious or whatever it might be. There still can be some issues there, but with the gender pay gap reporting, it really highlights the difference between the number of women in senior leadership positions versus in the rest of the organization. So companies are, I was going to say they're encouraged. No, it's not just encouraged, it's a legal requirement now to do that reporting, and then to, in Ireland at least, to address specifically what you're going to do about it. Like, what action steps are you going to take to close the gender pay gap, which I think is a really positive thing
Yeah.
to kind of come out from that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, we are improving, but we have work to do.
Yeah. This is it. This is it. That seems like a really nice place to wrap things up. I'd love to know, Ellen, what does being happier at work mean to you?
For me, I go back to the needs
Yeah.
conversation of
Mm,
playing to strengths for me, feeling valued, making a difference, uh, working with smart people who want to do the right thing. I'm also someone who I love feeling being part of something bigger than myself. So maybe that's about our mission and purpose
mm,
of, so the chance to help educate leaders, help create the next generation of leaders, having a hand in that is
yeah.
really meaningful to me
Yeah.
when I
Yeah. Yeah.
teach leadership class and coach young leaders.
Yeah. That's amazing. And
That
if
makes me
people,
happy.
yes, and it's so funny because like I absolutely, that's what makes me happy as well, is working with smart people, working on something that is really purposeful and has a lot of meaning. It's something I miss a lot actually, working when I work on my own. But it is like, it's the smart people doing the right thing, but with a mission or a meaning behind what it is that you're doing and the impact that you're going to have on the world. So definitely something that resonates with me. If people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, what's the best place they can do that? And don't forget to mention the book as well as a reminder.
Sure. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And it's Ellen Taaffe, Taaffe. And I also have a website, ellentaaffe.com. And I'm on the Kellogg website as well. So there are all those places. And my book is The Mirror Door: Break Through the Hidden Barrier That Locks Successful Women in Place. And you can, I'm just celebrating the 1 year anniversary of the book and have won many awards for it. And I'm just so enjoyed talking on podcasts and having these kinds of wonderful conversations and sharing. I'm now, speaking in organizations as well, trying to spread the word.
Brilliant. Love this. Thank you so much for your time today, Ellen. I really, really enjoyed this
You.
conversation.